I will say, so 4 years ago, I naively thought that the problem was that not enough people knew about or supported UBI. I thought, okay, if we can just get enough people to support UBI, then we'll be on the fast track. Silly me. So when I start my campaign, approval for universal basic income, 27%. We named it the freedom dividend because it tested much better with conservatives and Republicans with the word freedom in it. With the alternate names, it tested identically with liberals and progressives and independents. So some of those were Social Security for all, prosperity dividend, and it was always around the same level. And then conservatives were like, hate it, hate it, hate it. Ooh, freedom. So I was like, all right, fine. Freedom dividend. So by the time we came off the trail, the approval rating for universal basic income was in the mid 60s, 65%. Last I checked, it's still around that level. And so again, back then I thought, well, if enough of us want it, then we'll get it. And it turns out that's not how things work. So now I'm still trying to make universal basic income happen in two major ways. So one is based on an Onion article I saw about 15 years ago. And so that article said, American people hire lobbyists to fight for interests on Capitol Hill. And then there's a picture of a guy in a suit saying, now they'll take us seriously. And I thought that was the funniest thing I'd seen, but also kind of genius. So I was like, why don't we hire lobbyists? So in 2020, I raised about $10 million and hired lobbyists in Washington, D.C., who still are there trying to pass a revival of the enhanced child tax credit. So the enhanced child tax credit was our biggest achievement against poverty in a generation, which thanks to America's, and I did have a hand in lobbying for that during COVID. So we pass it toward the end of 2020. It comes into effect in 2021, and it cuts child poverty in this country roughly in half. It was around 11%, it went down to 5%. So of course our leaders looked at that and said we should keep doing it. No, that's not what happened. So it ran aground during the messy revival days toward the end of 21, and then it stopped in 22, so child poverty went up from 5% to 11% again. And when that happened, I had my fingers to the ground saying, are there going to be any protests, people yelling and screaming about the fact that we just plunged roughly 3 million families back into poverty? And there was nothing, not a whisper, not a whimper. There were a few well-intended journalists in January 22 who were like, hey, we just put a bunch of people back into severe distress. That's not so good, bad on us. So there were a few journalists who made that observation. Jeff Stein of the Washington Post was one. John Avlon, CNN is another. There's some people that were seeing it. But generally, it just disappeared. And it turns out that if you're poor in America and we give you a hand and then we shove you back down, you just go back to living hand to mouth and having your heads down and being like, oh, I guess that went away. I was in South Carolina last month, and I asked Reverend about 2021. I said, do you remember the families in your congregation just having a little bit of ease and less stress during 21? He's like, oh yeah, it was very real, it was palpable, and then it all just came back in 22. So my guys in DC go into a member's office and say, hey, you know what we've found out that your people don't like? Child poverty. And it's really popular if you get rid of it or reduce it in some way. And you're not going to believe this, but they actually got it out of the House of Representatives by a vote of something like 350 to 70 or something like that, with a bunch of abstentions at the beginning of this year. And now it's stuck in the Senate because, in the words of a Republican senator, we don't want to give Biden a win. Very, very dark times in the US of A. But I will say that my guys in DC who are lobbying for this will be in these members' office saying, hey, we've found out that your people don't like child poverty. And then the staffer, the chief of staff or the policy advisor will be like, who the hell are you lobbying for again? What's going on here? like, what's up? What's the gig? And they're like, no, just We just want you to reduce poverty. That's if we do this and it gets out of the Senate. If it does get out of the Senate, it's going to come out next year. Then we'll lift about 500,000 American kids out of poverty, maybe in perpetuity if this actually sticks, and reduce child poverty for another 2 million families or so. And by the way, if we do this, there's probably not going to be zero publicity around it and whatnot, but it would be the single greatest achievement of my career. And I'm going to suggest that like any of us had a hand in. So that's path number one to universal basic income. Now anyone can look at it and say, look, Andrew, that's not universal basic income. But it's certainly a stepping stone, right? I mean, you lift millions of people out of poverty who are kids, and that money goes straight to school, housing, fuel, books. I mean, like the data around the enhanced child tax credit in 21 was uniformly very, very positive. You even saw lower levels of abuse, of neglect, of like all sorts of problems. I mean, in many ways, it really was the UBI case laid out and implemented over millions of families at a cost of, the cost is, let's call it between, it's like 150 billion a year, give or take.
So I want to talk about path two, because that sounds like you just outlined path one. But I want to ask you a question because on the one hand, it feels dismal and like a state of journalism today or whatever, or citizen activism, that there wasn't more outcry about the enhanced child tax credit going away. Yeah. On the other hand, there's actually really an argument to be made, and I think folks you work with and you have been intentional about not wanting this to become too politicized and not getting so much publicity that it becomes a political football that then becomes an ideological thing that gets bounced around. Do you want to speak to that at all, or just the dynamics?
I even have some inside stories that I will not share, because in one of the problems with this space is that if I share the story, then like I shaft someone, and then that person now does not want to do anything with us. So it turns out that if I say, hey, I'm fighting for this thing, and I go in this environment, you have a real risk of politicizing it and saying, okay, who's for this, then who's going to be against it? And in the context of trying to reduce poverty in any form, you have some conservatives and Republicans who don't like the sound of it unless it's framed in a particular way. So the enhanced child tax credit, it's very pro-family. There are a bunch of things that conservatives can look at and be like, oh, I actually don't really mind this. As an example, like Mitt Romney looked at it and said, yeah, sure.
No, I don't know if conservatives consider him a conservative anymore.
Yeah, I know. Mitt Romney's kind of on the outs. I actually will talk more a moment about what's going on with that seat. So I'll give you two right now. I'll be very quick. This is what my email is about on Monday, but there are 11 people running to replace Mitt Romney. 8 of them have endorsed Trump. And then the 9th is a guy named John Curtis, who started Conservative Climate Caucus, which is Republicans trying to fight climate change. So I'm going to say that he's the sanest of the folks that are running to replace Mitt. And because it's an 11-person primary, he could win with 25, 30%. So your choices are really a Trumpy new Utah senator, a la Mike Lee, who's the other senator, who's terrible, honestly, and then a John Curtis type. And so I'm supporting John Curtis because it's like a massive difference, and it's a real opportunity. Now, if he wins that nomination, he coasts in the general. But what you want to do is you want to avoid politicizing it, to your point, Carly. And so the crew at Humanity Forward, which is the name of the lobbying organization, they're really assiduous about just, like not pounding the table or like making anyone look bad. What they do is they go in and they say, hey, if you decide to do this, here are a bunch of organizations in your district that will publicly say this is good. And some of them will be religious leaders. Some of them will be community leaders. Some of them might even be business leaders. Like they'll assemble a bunch of people in their district to try and provide cover for someone doing something. And that's the way. So one of the things I've learned about the way things happen in DC is that as soon as you hit the stick, so you have carrot and stick, as soon as you use the stick, you're essentially fucked. Because as soon as you use the stick does not actually produce action. The stick produces a like, well, screw you then, like I'm not going to deal with you. And one of the things that happens in the DC orbit is that they're really, really sensitive to negative press cycles and looking bad. And so if you do something that is trashing someone, then you're not going to get anything out of that person, and the trust is broken. So what's happening with us is that Humanity Forward does stuff behind the scenes, and even if something happens, they don't even take credit. And there are a lot of organizations in DC that are the reverse, where they're doing things that are counterproductive to a policy, and then if something does happen or doesn't happen, they just jump up and down and say, see, we did it. There's like some really, really messed up incentives in DC around actually getting legislation passed. So path number one is this wholesome onion-based lobbying org that I'm super excited about. And then the other path is trying to make the political system work better. Now that path is fraught, but to me it's also a necessity to actually solve some of the biggest problems of today. And I can get into why if you'd like.
Yes, please. Continue. No, yes, please. I mean, talk a little bit more about this path too, and about how you think a political system or an improved political system, how the system can be improved, and then how that could lead to something like a universal basic income.
Yeah, so I'm convinced that right now we're not going to get any of like the major problems solved in this context, and it probably would not surprise you to know that like I have much more trust and affection for one of the two major parties than the other. Like the Republican Party right now has like zero interest in problem solving or governance and is essentially enthralled to Trump. But right now the incentives are not conducive to big problems being solved, and I can break down why. And it's related to the end of the enhanced child tax credit, but you could put just about anything. And this is one of the main forces that's driving America to despair right now, is that we're realizing that we can all jump up and say something, and it just does not matter at all. And so the relationship between popular will and policy is essentially non-existent at this point. And I can break down for you why. So what is the approval rating for Congress as we're here together this afternoon?
Very low.
It's about 15%. I'm anchoring you guys low, so you know it's pretty low. And you guessed low, and it's low. What is the re-election rate for incumbent members of the House? 94%. That's right. It's a better win rate than the Jordan-era Chicago Bulls, or So in this system, if a bunch of people say, "Hey, we want this," it's like, it probably doesn't affect me because I've got a 94% re-election rate. And the reason I have a 94% re-election rate is that 90% of the districts in this country are drawn to be either quite blue or quite red. You cannot lose the other side in the general election in 9 out of 10 districts. And I'm thinking about, so where we are right now is actually one of the very few contested swing districts in the country. It genuinely could go either way depending upon various factors. But that's not the norm. The norm is I'm safe blue, I'm safe red. And so if you're safe blue or safe red, your incentives are not to reach across the aisle and solve a problem. Your incentives are to try and keep the base happy and off your back so you don't get primaried. And so the base consists of approximately 10% of voters who participate in the primary. So you see the Republicans running scared of their base voters, and the base likes Trump, so it's like, okay, I'll do whatever you want. There were 10 Republican House members who voted to impeach Trump after January 6th. How many of them made it back? 2. And the 2 were in Washington and California, which had top 2 primaries, which enabled them to sneak through. Among the 8 who did not get back in, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Peter Meyer, Anthony Gonzalez, some of the best figures, honestly. But you have an 80% wipeout rate in a system where ordinarily incumbents have a 94% re-election rate. Like, do you think anyone noticed? The Republicans like, okay, I get it. The only way I can lose my job is to run afoul of the base. On the Democratic side, there's a different set of incentives and distortions. It's not as dark. But the same principle applies, which is I do not need to make most of you happy for me to stay in office. I don't. I just need to make sure the base doesn't turn on me to the point where a primary is successful. This is one reason why Trump now controls the Republican Party. He just says, hey, mess with me. I'm going to endorse some crazy person to primary you, and your job security is going to plummet. And it works. It actually works. So this is why things have gone so far south. And the way out is not easy, but the way out is to modify the incentives I just outlined, which is to make it so that they genuinely have to make 51% of us happy to stay in office. I know, crazy, because that's kind of what we're brainwashed into thinking. It's like, don't you have to make 51% of us happy? Turns out they don't. But there's a straightforward way to make it so they do, and that's to replace the current party primaries with a nonpartisan all-party primary system, which has been implemented already in Maine, Alaska, and then Nevada voted it in. And there are 4 more states that are considering it this November. So if you can imagine 6, 8, 10 U.S. senators who don't have primaries anymore, do you think that that might change the entire tenor of policymaking and politics? It really could, you know, and the cost to liberate 6, 8, 10 U.S. senators is approximately $200 million. So I go around trying to tell people, it's like, look, we're going to spend $10 billion beating each other up this fall, making each other, you know, like afraid and angry and hateful. And then how much is it going to get spent bring us back together? Do you want to spend 2% of that to improve the mechanics and the incentives? It's like much more rational. So I was out west making that pitch, and I'm happy to say that of that 200 million required, I think we're at something like 40 or 50 million committed for November. So there are going to be some shots on goal in November. And I'm trying to get the other 150 million for various ballot initiatives to try and get some real wins in November. And this stuff does overlap with keeping Trump from winning, because you get a bunch of sane people in these states to vote and say, hey, we're independents and we want to change the voting system. The hope is that they're not going to be Trump voters because they're folks who don't like the fact that the extremes dominate everything. By the way, I gave a TED Talk on this topic that's going to come out May 7th. And it does a better job than I just did because it has cool graphics and slides and sound effects. And at one point I fly into the air. No, I don't do those things. But it is true that there's a TED Talk on this next week. And I'm really optimistic about it because it was a clearer case. I spent 5 minutes breaking down why things feel so terrible, and then 5 minutes illustrating a solution, and I'm hoping it has an impact.
Well, and it should help with the Trump problem. To your point, you no longer can hold these senators or congresspeople captive. Again, if they feel like the other side can actually vote for them as well, they're no longer. Isn't that the Liz Cheney story? She was.
Well, so the Liz Cheney story was that,
Alaska?
So the Lisa Murkowski story is the Alaska. So Lisa Murkowski is the only Republican senator who voted to impeach Trump, who was also up for re-election in 22. Her approval rating, her favorability rating among Alaskan Republicans was measured at 8% in one poll after impeachment vote. So it's like you turn on Trump, then we hate you. But Alaska got rid of their primaries in 2020. So she essentially just went straight to the general election, and she beat a Trump-endorsed challenger in the second round of ranked choice voting, something like 53-47. And that change meant that Lisa could do the right thing and stay in office. It's really as simple as that. Trump went to Alaska with his hand-picked Looney Tune and was like, Rhino, get her. And it totally would have worked in any normal primary system. And so and getting rid of the Alaska primaries cost $6 million because Alaska is very, very cheap. We could all be on Alaskan TV tonight if we wanted, saying hello from Hudson Valley. That low cost of $200. So by the way, Alaska was picked in part because it was cheap in terms of the reform efforts. So then, we're just going to try and spread it to as many states as possible.
It's interesting because I feel like there was a period in time, as you get older and you learn more about the system, where I was like, all right, the fundamental problem is money in politics. Yeah. How do you compare these two things? Like, why go after this as opposed to after the problem of money in politics, which also is at the root of a lot of rot?
Oh, yeah, sure thing. So money in politics is definitely right there in terms of top problems. The issue is that getting money out of politics requires a constitutional amendment, overturning Citizens United. It's practically very, very infeasible. Whereas this change the primary system is feasible. 3 states have done it. It costs $20 million a state. You just need 51% of people in that state to vote it in. In Nevada, 53% of people voted for it, even though both parties came out against it. And one of the ads was a military veteran looking at the camera saying, I went overseas to defend our country, I came back, and as an independent, I can't vote in our primaries. And I don't think that's right. And 53% of Nevadans were like, that's a pretty good argument. I think I should be able to vote. It costs money to get that advertisement up. But this is a much more feasible in real life. And one of the things, and this is like my problem, and I hope you feel my pain on this, everyone, is that I am I am intrinsically unable to pretend something's possible if it's not possible. Like if I'm like, oh, we should amend the Constitution, so that's like, yeah, we should also, teleport. And like, you know, I mean, but one of the problems is that in this system, that's actually totally the norm. Like there are people all the time being like, we should do this. I'm gonna fight for this. I'm gonna fight for that. And like it's mainly theatrical posturing, mainly. But at this point, the coin of the realm in most media environments and most of politics is that kind of thing. Is that kind of, especially social media. It's like, you know, if I give you like a really calm, broken down case of you know, of ranked choice voting or whatever, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's good. But you know, it's like, does it drive you to action? And then but if I demonstrate passion, anger, sadness, and personalize it, then it's like, oh, like I'm much more likely. So we have, you know, I'm convinced that the structural reform has to precede any of the other things. But the structural reform case only works on folks who have like a particular wonky perspective. And I think we're being duped, honestly, because people are being led into these various tribal battles and tit for tat, and meanwhile they're just laughing at us or making money off us, one of the two or both.
So obviously the title of this talk initially is The Path to UBI. You've just laid out the case of like fundamentally to get something done that the majority of American people want, you need this core structural reform. Yep. You've now just laid out that core structural reform. If that happened, do you think we'd get a UBI?
We'd sure as heck get an enhanced child tax credit because like 80% of Americans are for that. You know, if you lay out, it's like, hey, poor kids, like, want to give them some money? Data shows it's great. 120 economists signed a letter saying we should keep doing this. And people are like, yeah, that sounds great. And, you know, even the majority of legislators, I'm going to suggest, would get on board with that. And as we start putting stones in the stream, I think we can keep moving towards a society where poverty is alleviated. Because poverty to me is the most solvable of the major problems we have, truly. And here's my, and I'm going to level with you all. We're going to veer towards either utopia or dystopia pretty quickly. We're going to veer towards either Star Trek or Mad Max. And so if you want to lay out the path to Star Trek, I used to think, hey, UBI, and then I'm like, okay, it turns out that I got to fix our messed up political system. So structural reforms that make it so that what we want actually happens, and then alleviate poverty at scale. And then if you alleviate poverty, then you have a chance at easing some of the other problems. Because I genuinely think poverty is driving a lot of the other stuff. Poverty is driving hate, scarcity, violence, mental illness. It's not a cure-all. I mean, it's not like, hey, I give you money, it all goes away. But in the absence of any sort of financial security, it's going to be impossible to solve other problems. And one of the examples I use in my book, The War on Normal People, which is out there, is if you look at communities that lost their industrial job base, all the social ills come right in behind it. You know what I mean? Like as soon as you get rid of the jobs, like abuse goes up, violence goes up, the rest, like everything. And I'm going to suggest that we're experiencing a version of that right now in the U.S. writ large.
I mean, you were obviously very prescient. We spent the 2020 election cycle talking about automation and AI and its risks, and calling for universal basic income as your case for it was really around that story, which now is playing out, and now many more people are woken up to the idea of automation and what's going to happen. Is anything about the AI story playing out differently than you anticipated?
Oh yeah, I mean it's faster than I thought it was going to be. I did not see ChatGPT 4 being this powerful, this quick. My book talks about truck driving as a job that could be replaced. It turns out that a lot of knowledge work is going to get replaced well before truck driving. So I had the sequence wrong somewhat. So that to the extent that I missed, it's that I didn't realize how quickly it was going to be upon us. And just today I saw this use case where they replaced 700 workers with a bot and saved $38 million and drove customer service calls from 10 minutes to 2 minutes. So everyone won except the 700 people that used to work there.
And is universal basic income to you is still the best thing we can do, understanding that we can't, like, people used to always ask you, well, what about the meaning that work provides? And you're like, yeah, that's a tough one. Like, I don't know what to tell you about that.
What I say is that, look, I'm someone who believes very deeply that people need structure, purpose, fulfillment, community, and that we work for a multitude of reasons, not just to pay the bills. But having these things connected is a win. And it breaks my heart to think about the prosperity we've squandered over this last number of years. So I'll give you guys some numbers. Like, economy's 24 trillion, government's 4 trillion, where our debt now is at, let's call it 35 trillion and rising quick. I think it's around 37. And we have had the global reserve currency for quite some time. We could have done a lot with this last number of years. And what's happened in real life, when I was running even, people were like, oh, can we do that? Can we do that? And then like they thought it was like fanciful that we could actually send Americans money at scale. They'd say, oh, like, can we afford it? Like, can we actually do that? And then when COVID hit, we produced trillions of dollars very quickly, just as we did, frankly, when Wall Street collapsed. It's like when Wall Street got into trouble, then we found 1.8 trillion pretty quick. And then COVID, we produced several trillion dollars. And people blame the relief checks for inflation.
I was going to bring this up.
And be like, oh, UBI doesn't work, relief checks don't work, it drove inflation. And then so I want to present the math to you all. So there are, let's call it 300 million Americans, a little higher, 340, something along those lines. We printed enough to give every American approximately $15,000 during COVID. But none of you got $15,000. How much did you get? Like 1,200 maybe? So hang on, let me make sure I get this math right. So we got about 15% of what, so it might not be that we all get 15,000. Let me do this quick. Let's say we printed 4,340,000, maybe 11,000. There was enough to give us each 11,000, and then we got maybe 10% of that or something like that. So the rest of the money got pumped into the financial system and major corporates and state and local governments, which I don't hate. But there were a bunch of things that we did, and then people say, "Oh, inflation." It's like, actually, the inflation came from the fact that we just juiced the entire financial system to the tune of trillions of dollars, and some of that came to us in the form of these relief checks, but it was a very, very small sliver. It was maybe 15, 16, 17%. Like, what really happened is that we again squandered our bounty on institutions and not people. Because I think we've been scared this whole time, because people would say to me all the time, it's not possible, not possible. It's like, oh, it's been possible. But unfortunately, we've reached a point where we're genuinely in a bit of an uncharted ground where, owing 37 trillion and having your interest rates go up and like having this inflationary stuff, it's going to be an environment where you're going to see, like, the federal government is going to start freaking out about its spending in various ways. And it breaks my heart because we had opportunities this whole time, but we may have reached a point where like it gets harder. And now the case I'd make too, because a lot of people who were previously open to UBI now are not into UBI because of the reasons I just named. Like they're scared of inflation, they're scared of the deficit, they're scared of a whole bunch of things. And so the case I'm going to make to you all is that we have to do something quick, as soon as we can, because we're going to lose the capital efficiency foot race to technology increasingly. We already are losing. And AI is going to get leaps and bounds better, and we're going to be fortunate to stay the same. I'm middle-aged. I'm fortunate not to decline in any given. Like I'm not expecting to get 10 times better. But like AI is going to get 10 times better. And so the trap that we're in is that everyone's going to get brainwashed into thinking, okay, you have to be adaptable. You have to be like, you have to be like an efficient market actor, and if you can just do that, then you're going to be okay. No, and even if it's true for the people in this auditorium, it's certainly not going to be true for a huge mass of the hundreds of millions of Americans right now who are like on the edge. So the path to post scarcity. Number one, what I propose is look, just lay a foundational layer of cash, and then that's going to help a lot. But if you think bigger about what that economy has to look like, back to the original structure, purpose, fulfillment argument, I was with a guy who's head of a foundation today, And there are three things we would need to do. Number one is you would need to take existing institutions like the Rosendale Theater, just to throw it out. It's a nonprofit, community nonprofit. You take existing nonprofits and you have them grow in resources to be able to do more. And then you create some new ones. And then you invest in religious institutions. And like all of these end up becoming institutions you have to invest in very significantly. So my vision for the Star Trek economy is that we have to, and some of you are going to love this, some of you are not going to love this, is that we should create a caring economy, we should create an arts economy, we should create like a health and wellness economy, and then we should create multiple currencies and multiple matrices of value, so that if someone decides saying like, I'm going to become an artist and creative, it's like, oh great, here's like this like reward system, arts bucks, whatever you want to call it. Then you have this stuff, and then you can redeem it for various things. You can create parallel economies around different pursuits and activities. And this is, in my opinion, the only way out of this mess. Because if you fail in this and we just get stuck on this one measurement, we're all going to lose on an epic scale. We're going to turn on each other. We're going to, everything's going to go to hell. So the only path out is to actually invest in what a utopia could look like, informed by human values. And by the way, my campaign manager, Carly's husband, made me swear never to speak of this on the campaign trail, because they were like, look, the magical Asian man who wants to give everyone money is a hard enough sell without you introducing multiple currencies. Plus, you look Chinese, and everyone hates that Chinese social currency thing, so you're just going to sound like some kind of like authoritarian dystopian nightmare, like who decides who gets these, like, Yang bucks of yours, Yang, like blah, 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 whatever. So, and I listened, and I'm sure Zach was right, because it was hard enough getting people, on board with one thing. But in my mind, the one thing is the path to this multivariate economy. The multivariate economy is our only way out.
Clap for that. Somebody was clapping? How optimistic are you? More than anybody in this room, you talk to the leaders, and you're fighting the lobbying fights, and you're talking to the business leaders, and
so the positive spin is Buckminster Fuller's quote that we're going to be neck and neck between utopia and dystopia until the very end. That they're going to be like yeah, and then it's going to be a razor thin margin. I like that's the optimistic vision. There's a book out there called The Next Civil War by Stephen Marsh, who you guys heard from earlier. And there are various social scientists who've looked at this, who believe that America has been in this multi-decade period of disintegration based on a whole series of variables: civic engagement, visits to national monuments, national confidence, average height, like all sorts of variables. It's by a scholar named Peter Turchin, who used to study bugs. It's fun. But anyway, the formula, whatever. So. But anyway, we're on this multi-decade path to national disintegration, which includes a lot of things, and we're probably too late to arrest that path meaningfully. So what is most likely is that we enter this time of troubles, or like a decade of darkness, or something really pretty bad, honestly. And then
this is the positive case, by the way. This is what he started by saying.
No, but then the patterns are that after a period of darkness, then people become exhausted, and then after they become exhausted, they then come together and are like, okay, what are we really going to do? Because we can't just keep doing this. Like, this is madness. And then post-exhaustion, then you wind up with, let's say, a new set of leaders, new institutions, new solutions. And so in many ways, I see my work as trying to prepare those solutions and those leaders for the return. Now, people alternate between calling me pessimistic or optimistic. I will say, I think I'm very optimistic in attitude and action. And that's one thing I'm going to suggest to you all, is like, you can feel like, okay, things aren't going so well in the world writ large, but you should think, well, I should still be good to my loved ones and my family. I should still call my mom. I should still try and be productive today. I should still go for a jog. I should still, like I should try to do these things. And that in many ways is my approach. like, so when you ask me like how optimistic am I think it's going to be very, very unlikely that we avoid a very, very tumultuous, difficult period. And so in many ways, what I'm doing is trying to act optimistically and then project my optimism to a point where we'll be able to meaningfully come together and solve some of these problems.
I want to turn to audience questions in a few moments here. Just a few moments, sorry, I promise. We'll get to you. But I wanted to give you a moment to speak about this festival, because I've had a lot of people asking me what was the impetus for this, like how, people have been really, I think, enjoying the programming. So would love you to
well,
talk
first,
a
let's
bit
give
about
Carly Riley a huge round of applause for being an ace all throughout the day. Thank you, Carly.
Thank you.
I have a house in New Paltz, about maybe 12 minutes away, and this community has been tremendous and awesome for me and my family. We bought the house in 2015 and really loved it. I grew up in Schenectady and Westchester, so I was somewhat familiar. I'll tell you guys some local stories. I went skydiving at Skydive the Ranch in Gardiner for my 30th birthday. I went rock climbing at the Gonks for not any particular birthday, and was awesome. Obviously, no, I'm kidding. I mean, it was awesome. Like I was fine. So I've had a lot of affection for this area, and I speak a lot in different venues and events. And I was on the way back from one of them, and I thought, why am I always getting on a plane to speak? Like, why can't I speak someplace closer to where I live and my family spends time? And so I thought there should be an Ideas Fest where I hang my hat. The Hudson Valley doesn't have something like that. How many of you enjoyed being here today? Awesome, yeah. So, well, that means a lot, and we'd like to do it again next year. But it was just something where I want to solve my own problem. I want to make the world better, and sometimes that starts in your own backyard. And I'm really fortunate that folks like Xochitl and Carly and Stephen and Coleman and everyone else decided to join us this weekend. I'm grateful to them and to you.
All right, great, clap again, why not? Well, take some audience. I'm trying to leave plenty of room for audience questions, but I may ask some follow-ups as well. Okay, you were eager, and I want to honor that. Even before I was really ready for them, you were ready.
So you were talking about Alaska, which is interesting, because that's the place that's had a UBI for decades. And it's interesting, because even Sarah Palin talks about how in Alaska, it's collectively us who own the resources, and that's from conservative Republican. But so what are the other things? I was thinking, even as we were looking at fracking and all these debates about it, but no one was questioning who should own it. It's all these miles on the ground, but it's privately owned. What other resources are there that we can say we collectively own and should be given to us as a UBI?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Alaska has a petroleum dividend of, let's call it ranges based on the year, but let's call it a couple $1,000s per individual per year, and it reduces poverty. It helps kids. So the public resources that strike me as things we should jump on, the first obvious one is our data, which right now is getting sold for hundreds of billions of dollars a year. I used to say when I was running for president, it's like, who got your data check? And then people would laugh and be like, well, the data check went somewhere. And so if we get our own data back, that could be the beginnings of it. I think AI is going to change a lot of things, and AI is not going to pay a lot in tax. Like those 700 newly unemployed customer service workers used to pay tax. The company that makes the AI is probably not going to, and so I think you need an AI tax. And the easiest way to do that is to tax cloud computing or GPUs. By the way, one estimate I saw is that we might use 10% of the power grid on training AI, because you're running massive servers, like crunching trillions of data points. I know. I mean, that's a thinker, right? Oh, look, see, like that. It's a low estimate. I try and be conservative in my numbers, too. It's true. So there needs to be some kind of way for that value to come back to us. And in the absence of that, it makes me sad, because our tax system is so dumb and so easily gamed. And one of the things that I campaigned on was like, we should have a value-added tax. And the reason why value-added tax is kept off the table is because the corporates know they can't game that thing. Every other developed country has one except for us. Yeah. So I mean so it would be a data AI tax, VAT, and then VAT. By the way, you could have a VAT that falls disproportionately on high-end consumption, and because you have this crazy winner-take-all economy, so it's like, look, man, I'm just gonna make that yacht a whole lot more expensive. I mean, it's not gonna hurt the non-yacht owners, but and some of the yacht owners, between you and me, they'll still buy the fucking yacht. You know what I mean? Like when it's yacht time, they're not gonna be like, oh, the tax, too high. You know, like that's not the way that goes.
And to that, to the point about Alaska has the UBI, and as far as I know, not crazier inflation than anywhere else. Like that was the thing that drove me crazy, having been on your campaign, and really looking into, okay, what would a UBI maybe do for inflation, and then watching very intelligent people act like the fact that Americans got an extra $1,000 was the reason that all of these prices were persistently high. Like that's insane. Like that makes absolutely, to me, no sense.
Yeah, it's like months later, it's like you do realize that $1,000 got spent a long time ago.
I went to the doctor. Like, what are you talking about? Like, how is 12 months later that is the problem? And you had very smart people making that argument. Anyway, okay, more questions. Yes, we'll go to you and then we'll go to you. I want to make sure I'm surveying the landscape here.
Hi there, Eddie from Ulster County, actually. So thank you so much for bringing this event here. This is amazing. I was actually just stepped down as the executive director of the Next Gen Chamber of Commerce, and we were working on EITC, and we found that 35% of new entrepreneurs that came onto the scene during the pandemic were because of childcare reasons. So EITC
earned income tax credit for people who don't know.
Tax credit and the child tax credit can go a long way for our economy. My question to you is, clearly we're at a crossroads between democracy and capitalism. What role do you see entrepreneurs and even innovators have in this? What really feels like this decade of innovation that needs to really take a turn, that has to really improve our social lives?
I was just with Maria Bridge, who's the COO of an organization called Center for Humane Technology. How many of you have heard of Center for Humane Technology? How many of you have heard of Social Dilemma, the Netflix documentary about social media? So that was them, Tristan Harris and the gang. And I wish that more entrepreneurs and innovators backed Tristan and that vision, because they're right. I mean, they really are, and you see it. You're like, oh. And they're really positive humans too. Like they're not assholes about it. So that's my hope for more of the innovators and entrepreneurs. We just have to keep working on them. And the fact is, they respect Tristan and Azan and the gang. There's a lot more to be done there. And so this is one thing too. I would like your help with this, everyone. Is that I do not want to be in that position where we start casting every tech person, every entrepreneur as like a bad person or an enemy. You know what I mean? Like that. Like what we have to do is we have to work on enough of them to say like, hey guys, we get it. Like you've done some things and there's some unintended consequences, and maybe we can get ahead of this thing. Like maybe do this. I will say this is one of my main regrets about. By the way, I don't know if you can tell. Like, I don't go to sleep at night being like, "Oh, you mean I'm not president?" Like that's not, like my. But there are times that, like around this set of issues, I'm like, man, I fucking wish I was president, because, like, the Silicon Valley people are just playing us so bad, and like our government, and they're just like patting us on the head and just being like, there, like what you want us to show up to your thing and give you some answers, and then we'll just go back. And no, you're not going to do shit because, you're like stuck in the Stone Ages and you have this fucked up political system that like maybe makes it so that like you don't actually have to, like you'll get hurt by trying to do it. Like, I mean, there's like a real asymmetry, shall we say, or inequity. Like I would love to be the president of that convo, just be like, hey guys, look, I get the game. Let's put it that way. And some of those folks do know me, and I believe would understand that there's a serious actor on the other side, as opposed to right now they're just like, look, let me just pantomime what you need, like do my performance and get the hell out. yeah.
Well,
I mean,
like Altman's a huge UBI fan, as far as I understand it.
yeah, Sam is a UBI guy, and there's like a multi-year, 8-figure UBI trial that he has backed that I believe is going to have data come out sometime this year. So hopefully keep an eye out for that, because I think the data is going to be very positive. And he employs half a dozen PhDs or more to make sure the data is buttoned up. This is the sort of thing our government should be doing, but they're not. So some other people are. And I applaud that sort of work, obviously, because they just gave people money and saw what happened.
All right. Okay. Well, John, you're right there. So let's go to
Cameron.
Cameron.
Oh, Charles.
Charles. Oh, sorry about that, Charles. Sorry, Charles.
No worries.
my
Speaking on state ballot initiatives that we were talking about before, sadly, New York State is not one of those states. But although there are paths on the more local level, which one of them would be like the up and coming Final Five NYC movement.
You're talking about like ranked choice voting initiatives.
Yes,
Yeah,
ranked choice voting and open primaries, just
open primaries.
combination. But let's say in 2025 or 2026, it's on the ballot and it passes on the city level, and now for every city election, the Alaska system is basically implemented. How viable do you think local successes like that would be in applying pressure upon state legislators to actually start taking action on their own in states without direct ballot initiatives?
I love the question, Charles. And the fact is, it would have a huge difference because there are massive population centers where if you have huge cities using ranked choice voting and nonpartisan primaries, let's say, then it's very tough for the state to say, oh, we can't do this, or it's confusing for people, because literally, like in some cases, most people in the state might already be doing it. And you are seeing that with some other cities around the country, Seattle being one, where they adopt it and then it raises pressure. Portland legislatively put forward a referendum to switch to ranked choice voting, and that's going to be on the ballot in November. If it happens, then it'll be effective in the next cycle. So there are, and I think that's partially because there are some cities in Portland that or in Oregon that have adopted it. We have to master and maximize the art of the possible. And so if you look at a place like New York State and say, well, like these state legislators are never going to do it, you can get major municipalities in different markets to adopt it. By the way, one feeding ground for this I love is colleges, is that some colleges have become massive adopters of ranked choice voting in their student elections and other things. And then when they come out of college, they get really pissed off when, all of a sudden their ballot looks really archaic and they're not using ranked choice voting. So that's one thing I really enjoy. But cities are obviously, like a massive opportunity and can normalize it. So I'm on the board of an organization called Fair Vote that is championing ranked choice voting around the country. And that's, because to your point, Charles, that's one of the real life paths. Okay. And Final Five NYC is exactly that kind of initiative.
So let's go to the woman right there, and then I'll move back over here, y'all. I think we should have time. There's a couple more, and we have 5 minutes, so we should be able to make it to most folks here.
Oh, yeah, sure. Where am I going?
I'm wondering how soon you think we could get ranked choice voting in New York statewide, since it is already in New York City, just to scale it up. I know Dave Heller, who helped to get it adopted in Berkeley and Oakland. I was in San Francisco 20 years ago.
Good for you. Nice.
20 years ago when it was adopted, and I helped at the polls to educate people about it. He says that if we start at the county level, that we can send a memorandum to Albany and that they can put pressure. I've got petitions here for people to sign. If we have an army of people out there getting its signatures, do you think...
Are you part of an organization?
I am an independent person on planet Earth. I'm aware of Fair Vote and Unite New York, and I went to the Unite New York website and I compiled a ballot petition that I have got here. So if we have more people doing that, because I'm actually, full disclosure, I'll volunteer for Bobby Kennedy as well. And everywhere we go, people say, well, I can't vote for him because Trump is going to get in. So I have loved ranked choice voting and wanted to get it adopted worldwide. So I'm just really starting with that.
But let me say that I love what you're doing. I think anyone here who would consider signing that petition should do so because the path to UBI is RCV. Like there is no path to UBI that is not ranked choice voting. And so, thank you for taking the time and the energy to do it. And I love it. And I would love to see it in all of New York State if we can implement it in other places. I'm not familiar with what the politics are of that in Albany. But I would love to put pressure on him for sure.
Okay, I'll talk.
But if you have a petition, I'd really consider.
In the sweater. I apologize. Yes, you right there. You had your hand raised.
That's funny.
So I'm Tricia Bowen. I'm a member of the Ulster Democratic Committee, and we do all of our committee voting through ranked choice voting. We use something called opavote.com, so people can vote from home if they can't do an in-person meeting. And then we're going to put up legislation so that we can do ranked choice voting in Ulster County as well. So
yes. It's music to my ears. Makes me so happy. But guys, seriously, with some of your help, we mainstream universal basic income 4 years ago. We need to mainstream ranked choice voting in the same way, so people understand that that's our path out of madness.
Hi, thoroughly enjoying this. Thank you. I'll make this fast. I hear you mentioning colleges, tech, different things with New York State. My question is, high-speed rail, New York City to Albany, Albany to Buffalo, connecting universities, cities, maybe building tech centers and trying to see if that can work in terms of developing economies. And then maybe in states near here, such as Pennsylvania, extending into Ohio, if that kind of model can take hold, and if there's any ability to look at that, or what would be, what would need to be done to kind of try to implement that and research that.
Oh wow, I'm okay. So some confessions to make. One, I almost irrationally love trains and high-speed rail. I just think and some of them, I will say that the markets you're describing may or may not be the top choices in terms of cities to connect. But I almost irrationally love them and just think you do it. That's what government's for. Just connect communities and make it so people can traverse distances. It's in part that my parents are from Taiwan, and Taiwan has high-speed rails. So I go there, and there's a train that goes the equivalent of New York to D.C. in an hour and a half, and it bends the laws of time and space. You know what I mean? Imagine going the equivalent of 2-hour drive in 40 minutes. New towns have arisen. It's glorious. And then you come back here and you're like, why can't we have nice things? So I almost irrationally love those. I'm a both and person on this, where it's we should be building tech centers and acknowledge that there are a lot of people that are not going to have their problem solved or find employment at the tech center, and try and develop in different ways. But there's there's a false constraint on what we can do. It's one of the things that pains me is oh, you do this, you can't do that. It's we remain the richest society in the history of the world. We can probably do multiple things.
Okay, maybe let's do one. Oh my gosh. Then there weren't that many hands, and then more hands go up. We'll go here. I saw you.
Didn't you know how much I love trains? I might have hidden that.
Thank you. Two quick questions. One, what would the election system look like without a primary system? And two, what factors do you attribute to that nice rise in UBI during 2020, where we went up to 66, 68%, you said?
For the second one, it was probably COVID, you know what I mean? There was a period when everyone's oh, shoot, UBI time. I got dozens of press requests that week, just being you want to talk about how right you were and all that stuff. People would thank me in the street. It was nice, so I think that was a big contributor. So the way elections look without primaries is just what it looks like in Alaska. So I will say that there's a limit on how many candidates get through to the general election, and the human mind can accept anywhere up to 5 candidates to consider, but after 5 you get confused, FYI. So the way the all-party primary works is you can run any party, like just put the letter next to your name, and then the top 5 candidates get through to the general. And then you then choose based on ranked choice voting.
And you were asking about abolishing primaries, I think.
Well,
that right?
so that's like what's that called? That's called a nonpartisan primary, an all-party primary. That's the system that Nevada just voted in. That's what Alaska adopted in 2020, and that is to me our best feasible path. And if you ask me to choose the magic number, it is 5. I think 5 is optimal, because then you wind up with, let's call it, I think in Alaska it was like 2 Republicans, a Democrat, an independent, and like another thing. And then each of them ends up developing a certain following, and then the consensus ends up driving forward a non-crazy person, honestly. So Sarah Palin lost because of this process. And my ongoing joke is that if Sarah had won, we'd all be 3 IQ points dumber and sadder, because she'd have a TV camera in her face every week saying, "Say something crazy, Sarah. Say something crazy." And she'd be like, "It's kind of my job. Glad to." But then worse yet, the camera would then go to a Democrat and say, "Did you see the crazy thing Sarah said? What do you think? What do you think?" And then we'd all be like, "Oh, God." Anyway. So that was avoided by adopting ranked choice voting and nonpartisan primaries, $6 million. Really, it's the best ROI like anyone's ever seen, is the case I'm making.
All right, let's do one more. And then, does that sound right? We'll do one more, and then we'll kind of let people wrap, and then maybe we'll stick around for a second. Right behind you, just for ease of walking for John.
Hey, first of all, thank you very much for this day. It's been really great, and happy to have this in our backyard. It seems like many of the things you're pointing out are tectonic changes, and it seems to me at least that any change has to be coupled with incentives. So the reason the system is the way it is right now is because the incentives are set up the way they are. Whether you're looking at tech or lobby or the money in politics. So if looking at like one specific topic, which is ranked voting, sorry, what would you say are the kind of ducks to put in line, the incentives that should be changed so that we see ranked voting happening in more places?
Yeah, you're totally right. Like that, it's an incentives problem, and there's an incentives problem in each of these levels. And the reason why ranked choice voting is catching on so much is that it benefits most of us. Like even if you're a hardcore Democrat and you're represented with this, be like, oh, that'll actually help make the representative more emblematic of what people want and less prone to extremes and craziness. And so it's the problem is really like getting enough energy from the frustrated majority of us who right now are somewhat inclined to just say like, oh, like I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to think about this. It's like, no, you have to think about this, and then you have to think about it at this higher level, and then it's like this process change. I mean, it's not easy, but the incentives are there. That's one reason why I'm pushing this so hard, is that if enough of us got together, and the proof is in Nevada. Both parties came out against it, and 53% of Nevadans said, I actually kind of like the sound of voting for whomever I want. And the objection was, it's too confusing for voters if you don't have a primary. And people are like, what? I can...
Primary is way more confusing.
I can figure this out. So that's the movement. That's like trying to get enough people who are frustrated together and say, you know what? Like I'm actually down with this process change, because like the current primaries, are working so well. And I genuinely believe that's the highest leverage move we can make that will lead to some of the other things. And if you do that, then, by the way, if our elected representatives genuinely had to answer to most of us, they would get money out of politics. You know what I mean? Like right now, the problem is that you have this like protective moat. It's like, okay, I'm in this like insular little thing, and I get these folks, and I can defend myself, and da da da. It's like if you genuinely made it so I had to answer to most of us, they'd be like, why am I spending all my time raising money from like all this stuff? Like most of my people want me to get money out of politics. Like, you know, so you change that incentive, then you have a chance at some of these other things. Now, is that optimistic? Yes, but it is, in my opinion, like our most realistic path.
Well, fantastic. Thank you all so much. Thank you all so much. Thanks for everyone for being here.